Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
I'm Dr. Mary Finley-Brook in the Department of Geography and the Environment here at the University of Richmond, and welcome to our Symposium on Environmental Racism. This is a timely topic when many are calling for the governor's resignation. And we had an excellent panel at noon. Some of you were able to attend. We had community-based organizers from across the state. We heard from Angela Harris of the Southeast Care Coalition. We heard from Richard Walker, Bridging the Gap in Virginia. We heard from John and Ruby Laurie, who are residents and agriculturalists from Union Hill. We heard from Dr. Lakshmi Fjord, Yogaville, Friends of Buckingham, and University of Virginia. And this was moderated by our very own Spider, Kendall Crawford from the Virginia Interfaith Power and Light. She graduated from our nonprofit studies program. So we have many co-sponsors for this event, and I want to make sure that I go through them all. And of course, I didn't bring that piece of paper up to the podium with me, so we'll see how good my memory is today. The first that I absolutely want to say is Holly Blake and the Will Program. Absolutely fantastic, supportive, helped us get this together in a very short amount of time. Kendall reads my mind. She's so awesome. I love you. So our co-sponsors are Will, the Department of Geography and the Environment, the 1992 Environmental Studies class gift, so excited to have alums involved, the Center for Civic Engagement, West Hampton College, the Chaplaincy, American Studies, Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies, Rhetoric and Communication Studies, and the Arts and Science Dean's Office. So thank you to all of our sponsors. So this event is part of University of Richmond's 2018-2019 one-book lecture series for When They Call You a Terrorist, a Black Lives Matter memoir. I hope everybody is reading that book. We've had fantastic events throughout the year. There will be many more this month, so I definitely encourage you to look on the University of Richmond website to get a listing of all the things that we have happening with that lecture series. We have two community partners co-sponsoring this event. The first is the Virginia Environmental Justice Collaborative, and the second is Virginia Interfaith Power and Light. So our moderator for this event is Reverend Dr. Faith Harris, who is the vice chair, chair of Virginia Interfaith Power and Light and vice chair of Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy. So these two are associated. Reverend Dr. Faith Harris is an assistant professor of theology. She's the director of the Johnson A. Edasawan, did I do that more or less? I'm sorry, Edasawan Center for Faith, Leadership, and Public Life, and the Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology at Virginia Union University here in Richmond. So welcome our panelists. Our moderator, yes. Our panelists, we have Reverend Leo Woodberry. You're going to get more of an introduction, but just so you know the treat that you're in for here, Singh Shabazz, Swami Dayananda, and Mustafa Santiago Ali. So this is who we will have a full introduction to in a moment. So I did want to start by mentioning the important work that Reverend Dr. Faith Harris and I have been doing for the last couple of years. I think it's important for us to pay attention to what's happening in our state government. So in 2017, the Reverend and I were the two people that, for the Environmental Justice Collaborative, recommended the creation of the Governor's Advisory Council on Environmental Justice. And I want us to think about that important work. Unfortunately, just this last month, in fact, January 22nd, the end of that council did happen. I would argue, this is me speaking personally, I would argue that that happened because we spoke about environmental racism in Union Hill, and particularly related to gas infrastructure. And that's something that's very difficult for people in our state government to have people discuss when they've been trying to silence it for the last year. And so the fact that they had an advisory council that really wanted to speak about what they heard from people who were impacted, that tell us how this impacts their lives, the fact that the advisory council heard that and communicated that to the governor is why I personally believe that that council was discontinued. So there is going to be a new advisory council. I would argue that the first council was somewhat of a token body, and that the second council, they're going to screen who gets on it and what they're able to talk about. So that, I would suggest, is evidence of current day environmental racism within our state government. So what I would suggest is that not to look poorly on what the Reverend and I did in 2017, that was an important step, but to realize that we have to keep pushing, that we have to keep working and finding ways to make sure to stand united for policy and political reform in this state. We need to work to advance climate justice. We need to work to advance environmental justice. And we want to invite you to give us feedback in two ways today as we think about how to do that. The first, as you will see, we have some posters on the back of the room, and I have a feeling I didn't get the markers out, so I will make sure to do that. But we would love to hear from you how you could think that this campus and the Richmond community could continue to act after this event. Hearing what we heard from the first panel, people wanted to say, how can we get involved? We're going to hear from a second panel some ways that we could think about this. But what are we going to do after this event? We're not just sitting here, I hope, as participants listening. I hope there will be a step that we can take to continue acting on what we've learned about today. The other way that we'd like to have you be involved, so geography and Will's student Cadest, today will be working with myself to collect feedback. So many of you have an index card. We would love you to legibly, in a fairly condensed way, let us know some questions that you have for the panelists at the end. We will be hearing just 2 questions, and after that, it's going to come from you. So what would you like to know from these panelists? I welcome you to our second panel. It's called Equity and Justice in the U.S. Energy Transition, and we're so glad you could join us. Thank you.
Good afternoon. As Dr. Mary Finley-Brook has already introduced me, I just want to say how honored I am to be invited to participate as moderator for this panel and to have worked with Dr. Finley-Brook for the last year and more on these issues of great importance, but also drawing together and putting together what I can only call more, not just a coalition or a collaboration, but a family of people who care about others, who care about the issues of the environment, but also care about doing this work with integrity and being honest and sometimes maybe considered a little too outspoken, but that is the nature of forces of nature, and Mary Finley-Brook is one of those. She's probably the 5th element. So thank you for having us here and inviting us here and putting all the hard work that you did to put this together. So let me go right into introductions of our panel so we can have our conversation. Starting on the end, we have, the far end, we have Mustafa Santiago Ali. He is the Senior Vice President of Climate, Environmental Justice, and Community Revitalization for the Hop Caucus. The Hop Caucus is a national nonprofit and nonpartisan organization that connects communities to build power and create positive change. Throughout his career, Mr. Ali has conducted over 1,000 presentations across the country and worked with over 500 domestic and international communities to secure environmental, health, and economic justice. Mustafa Ali joined the Hip Hop Caucus after working 24 years at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency At the EPA, he served as the Senior Advisor for Environmental Justice and Community Revitalization. Mustafa Ali has been a guest lecturer at Yale University, George Washington University, Georgetown University, Spelman College, Albany Law School, Howard University School of Law. Mustafa is a former instructor at West Virginia University and Stanford University. So let's welcome Mr. Ali. To his right is Swami Dayananda. She is a monastic disciple of Swami Satchidananda. I never say that correctly. Since 1983 and lives in Yogaville in Buckingham, Virginia. Her ongoing service includes being a member of the Board of Trustees and the Spiritual Life Board. She has served as Hatha Yoga and meditation instructor, as well as Hatha Yoga teacher trainer. She also served as the director of Lotus Center for All Faiths, fostering interfaith education, dialogue, and cooperation. She is a member of Yogaville Environmental Solutions, yes, created in 2014 to protect Yogaville and to be a good steward of Mother Nature. She is a member of the Friends of Buckingham, through which she has been peacefully protesting ACP as a Swami activist. Let's welcome Swami Dayananda. And to her right, we have Reverend Leo Woodberry. Reverend Woodberry serves the Kingdom Living Temple, a Christian church that is engaged in ecumenical interfaith work. KLT prioritizes outreaching and seeking to minister and assist people in the community and empower them spiritually, mentally, physically, socially, and globally. Reverend Woodberry is the executive director of New Alpha Community Development Corporation in Florence, South Carolina. New Alpha Community Development Corporation, a 501c3 nonprofit organization working in the areas of environmental health and community economic development. The CDC places a particular emphasis on environomics. Environomics is the intersection where environmental issues and community economic development meet. The CDC's goals are to develop participatory democratic empowerment models that improve the lives of lower and middle class people and families by building assets and creating wealth for everyday people. He is also one of the co-founders of and leader for the JusticeFirst tour and now the JusticeFirst organization. And they are all of Reverend Woodberry's work has culminated in the Whitney M. Slater Foundation Community Solar Farm, where they will be serving 1,200 households. So we look forward to hearing more about that and Reverend Woodberry's work. And so let's welcome him. And to my left, there we have Singh Shabazz, presently serves as project director for the STEPS Coalition Gulf Coast Regional Collaborative. Previously, Shabazz served as director of programs and development for Hijra House Accommodations Association, a community and faith-based organization located in Biloxi, Mississippi. As a Hijra House co-founder, Shabazz steered the organization through energy policy advocacy and energy efficiency programs during the latter stages of Hurricane Katrina recovery, and again during the implementation of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. Under Shabazz's leadership, Hijra House launched the Just Transition Mississippi campaign and the Efficient and Renewable initiative, prioritizing minority contractors in energy efficiency and renewable energy projects, and teaming with the organizations and advocates to educate minority communities on energy policy and planning. So let's also welcome Mr. Shabazz. So we want to start our panel with one question that is raised whenever we talk about this from a faith perspective. And so I'd like for you to describe your work advocating climate justice and environmental justice in a way, and bring into the conversation how ethics and faith influence your work. So let's start at the end, as I started with the introductions. Let's start with Mustafa Ali.
Okay. Well, being raised in a family of ministers, faith has always driven most of the work that I've done. But I'd like to broaden it out just a little bit. For those of you who have studied the principles of environmental justice, you know the first principle is honoring Mother Earth, and that comes from many of our indigenous brothers and sisters. So for me, that speaks to a faith that's broader than any book can contain, from any house of worship presents, but gives us a broad platform for our existence. And if you look at many of the folks who've come through the environmental justice movement, the civil rights movement, the Chicano movement, or the AIM movement, they understood their connection to a greater spiritual power. So when you work in the federal government or state government or local government, there's supposed to be a sort of a separation of church and state, if you will. I'm not sure how, if you are a person of faith, that you don't connect some of the work that you're doing in the sense of trying to make sure that your brothers and sisters are in a better place. But you have to do what you can in that space. It also speaks to the question of ethics. When you see the types of activities that have gone on from 1619 and before then, so everybody is now focusing on 1619 as one of the first dates of African slaves being brought to this country, or at least being brought to Virginia. If you look at how our indigenous brothers and sisters were stripped away from their land, taken away from their cultural practices, taken away from their traditional foods. So for those of you who focus on food justice issues, there's an ethical component that's there in how we have done some very negative things in the past. And the question is, when we place the mirror up today, what do we see in the reflection of our actions today? When our engagement with our Asian and Pacific Islander brothers and sisters, especially Chinese Americans who helped to build the infrastructure in our country, and now we want to ignore that contribution, then it speaks again to the ethics. It speaks again to who we are as a country and how we want to represent ourselves. It speaks to our spirituality, it speaks to our humanity, but it also speaks to the promise that for those who consider or call themselves folks of faith have to live up to. And that is to move forward on creating something better, of being a better steward to your brothers and sisters, and making sure that those who are the least of us have an opportunity to be able to move forward in a really positive direction. So for me, I see spirituality, I see faith reflected in people's actions. My father, before he passed away last year, and actually we're celebrating or commemorating his last day on earth tomorrow, he used to tell me, and he used to share with my mother, don't tell me that you love me, show me. So that speaks to what we truly are, how we truly represent ourselves, whether as a country, as a community, as individuals. And it will also speak to our survival and our existence. When we talk about these impacts that are happening, and y'all have to forgive me because I only know how to give people something I call real talk. And I probably shouldn't have come to the University of Richmond if that's not what you want. We have made some terrible mistakes. But there's also some beauties that exist when we, as Angela shared with the young people who are sitting here and standing in front of you, when we become woke. So, our grandparents shared with us that when you know better, do better. Governor Northam knew that he needed to do better, and he's chosen not to. He knew that he could do better, and this speaks to faith, in relationship to Union Hill in Buckingham County. So he knew that he should have got engaged in that process and to make sure that that community that was, as everyone has said, was founded by freed slaves, didn't have to deal with the injustices that he knows have existed in Newport News and a number of other locations across this Commonwealth. We don't even have to leave outside of Virginia. So if you are a person of faith, as many of our politicians and leaders say that they are, then it's time for you to do better. And that means that these injustices that are happening can no longer be the paradigm that we operate from. And I'll close out with this. We have a choice to make. We can either operate from a 20th century paradigm, and we know some of the negative things that happened in the 20th century, the 19th century, the 18th century, the 17th century, and we can go on and on and on. Or we can decide that we will evolve, that we will operate from a 21st century paradigm where equity is something that is not only spoke about, but it's something that is integrated into every action, policy, activity that we have. From the way that our institutions such as this one decides whether to divest or not. If we are going to embrace a new Green Deal and make sure that equity is a part of that process so that we don't move from an old paradigm from the fossil fuel industry to a new green paradigm where we still don't have equity for folks and they can't truly participate fully in that process. That's our faith. Our faith should be about protecting this planet and protecting our most vulnerable communities. Because if we do that, then we make real change happen. So I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ali. Now, I want to pass the same question to, pose the same question to you, Swami Dayananda, and I'll repeat it just so that you describe your work advancing climate justice and environmental justice, and how do ethics and faith influence your actions, those actions that you...
Thank you. So if you come to Yogaville, where I live, and walk into the hall, on the left side it'll say, love all, serve all. And on the right side it says, be good, do good. And so our practice of yoga, of the body, hatha yoga, meditation, all that we do when we come out of our meditation room, classrooms, we use that energy to transform to serve all and love all. And now especially that all, I am more conscious that it includes environment, animals, the whole world. I used to think more of it as people. And there's a saying in the back that says, if you have faith, nothing is impossible. If we have faith, nothing is impossible. Do we have faith that that is true? That will be up to our own heart. And there's a saying that our teacher used to often say, and when I'm feeling a little anxious and a little afraid, I would think of this. Faith and fear don't go together. Faith and fear don't go together. And I see all of you and all the people that serve in this journey of environmental justice, that most people, and in fact all, they are fearless. Whether you have any faith as Christianity or Hinduism or any identified faith, in this case, we're using the word faith as any individual that believes deeply. And faith means having a belief in something you cannot prove or nobody else can prove for you. Mm-hmm. That's the kind of spirit that I see in all the incredible, beautiful supporters of Union Hill and the people of Union Hill themselves. When I have met the pastor of Union Hill, Union Grove, and the congregation of Baptist, and when I see them singing gospel and them preaching, what joy they have, especially when they mention the name Jesus. It is an absolutely unstoppable, absolutely complete faith that there is something in their heart that they're connecting to. And whether I connect to another form of God or the name, we came together in one in that faith, in the spirit, and fearlessly following them, we walk to what seems to be a huge billion-dollar corporation. Who are we to face that? But there is that faith that doesn't stop us, it helps us to move forward. So I like to just put this in a yogic perspective. Ethics, yogis, do they believe in moral things? Or do they just practice these physical position, pretzel, and stand on your head? Well, 8 limbs of yoga teaches that even before or while you take care of your body to make it healthy and supple, and your mind so that it will be clean and at peace, there is a teaching that says you must also, you have to have yama niyama. That is yogic ethical principles. And I will talk about only the first 3 of yama. There are 10 of them, 5 in yama, 5 in niyama. Is that a time?
That was saying short on time.
Yeah. I was wondering somebody would give flash. Yes. So I will speed up a little bit. So one of the, really go quick. Yama has number 1, non-violence. Ahimsa is one of the fundamental aspects of yogic learning, to be non-violent in whatever we do, whatever we think. And second is satyam, satya, truth. And the third is non-greed. And if we can keep that, and then with that face whatever challenges we have that power of that spirit to overcome. If you think of it, the industries are really not observing those 3 things. So I will conclude with I think that is enough. Thank you so much. Please come to Yogaville and practice with us. Om Shanti.
Shall I move to the next question? Reverend Woodberry, same question posed to you. Describe a little bit about your work and how ethics and your faith influence.
Okay, so for me as a pastor, of course, faith is fundamental. But then also as a member of Green Faith, a board member of Green Faith, which is an international and interfaith organization, I understand the connections that bind us all together. And one of those is faith, and also understanding that there's a moral imperative for each one of us to do the right thing. And so that is what guides my work. The fact that we all, in all faith traditions, we are called to be stewards of the earth. Mm-hmm. That when I look at my particular faith tradition, it doesn't just say chase money and collect all the assets that you possibly can, but it says be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. Mm-hmm. Put something back. That extractive industries are not what faith and love of the planet and good stewardship is about. That if we love the earth, then we realize that we also have to love one another, mm-hmm. which means that we should not be tied to a culture of death, mm-hmm. that calls us to get our energy from oil that comes from dinosaurs that lay dead long ago in the ground, and that we shouldn't rely on coal that is interned in the earth as if in a grave, but instead we should be pursuing energy that is life-giving and life-affirming, like the energy that comes from the sun and the energy that comes from the wind. Realizing that we are responsible for one another. In my faith tradition, when Jesus Christ was asked, what is the greatest of all commandments? And they were trying to trick him because there's 613 commandments in the Old Testament. And he looked at them and he said, the greatest commandment of all is this, that you love your Lord God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and you love your neighbor as yourself. And if you have those two things bound together with faith, then we can do what others call impossible. And in order to be a person of faith, you don't have to attend a household of worship.
Right.
You don't have to be a member of a certain denomination or religion. Or as my faith tradition says, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So if you're hoping for a better tomorrow, you are a person of faith. If you struggle and you work to make this a better world, even though you may not see any evidence of that right now, you are a person of faith. And I'll close by saying this. I often would thank my mother, who is no longer with us, who was born the same year as the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I would thank her because I said, you know, Mom, you guys knew that you didn't have the education to attend college. You knew that you would never hold elected office. You knew that you would never work for a corporation, but you did what you did for us. And because they had faith, when I would journey to my grandparents' house in Britain's Neck, South Carolina in the 1960s as a child, all the roads were dirt except for Highway 908 and Highway 41. Everyone had outhouses. My grandfather, who was a sharecropper, had no electricity. At night he lit kerosene lamps, and the only entertainment was a transistor radio, the only heat, a stone fireplace, and a potbelly stove. But because of faith and determination, 20 years later, Jim Crow was dead and buried. Integration was the rule of the land. Everyone had electricity. Every road was paved. So there's one more thing that I like to say about faith, that all things are possible if you only believe.
Thank you, Reverend Woodberry. And so now to our final panelist. We pose the same question to you. Describe your work advancing climate justice and environmental justice, and how do ethics and faith influence your work?
Okay, great. So first I'm going to quickly say thank you. I'm honored to be here in front of you all, and I hope I'm blessed. I have a little faith that I can say something that will benefit you. If I say anything wrong, I definitely apologize to you and hope you forgive that. So my name is Singh Shabazz. I work in Biloxi, Mississippi. I work in Mississippi, so that answers the faith question. Mississippi is year after year at the bottom of all the lists. But we do work in the aftermath of the BPO spill. I'm currently a project director for the Gulf Coast Regional Collaborative, as you heard. And what that project aims to do is influence how the more than $18 billion in fines will be allocated to different projects to restore 5 states that were heavily impacted by the BPO spill. With that, we employ a couple of different strategies, or 3 different strategies. All right, so quickly, a quick point about the coast is there's about an 8% Vietnamese American population. That's the complete Asian American population on that southern states, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. But they're 80% of the licensed fishermen in Mississippi. So they were severely impacted by the BPO spill. So one of our strategies is promoting language access for Vietnamese American fishermen. The second is around stakeholder and community organizing, and that kind of ties into how we get into the energy piece. We really want the energy discussion, the renewable energy discussion, the just transition discussion to be a part of that whole restoration process. And then finally, our third strategy in terms of our work is workforce and economic development. I think you heard a few references to some of the things we're trying to do around renewable energy, and we've got a pretty solid foothold around energy efficiency. Only partially joking when I answered about the faith and ethics being a driving force in Mississippi. I mean, we have a very notorious, a very bad history in terms of inequities and inequalities and injustice done to people on the basis of color or disbelief or even economics. And it takes faith, a belief in something that you can't quite prove, that you just hope for. I can't say it as well as you said it, but I think that's the biggest faith. And the other thing I'll quickly say, as a member of a minority faith, in terms of a religion or a practice, I'm a Sunni Muslim by birth and also by choice. My parents were part of the Nation of Islam. They had a strong belief that you do for self, and as part of a small Islamic community in a very conservative state, I think a big part of having faith or showing faith and letting faith show up in your work is moving outside of that, stepping into that bigger definition of faith, where you do ecumenical work, where you work with all so-called express faiths. So that would be my response.
Thank you. Okay, so what Dr. Finley and Cadest are going through the audience to pick up any cards and questions that you may want to pose to the panel. And while they're doing that, I will throw out a second question, and any panelist who would like to answer, I would encourage you to do so, but I would love to have Mr. Shabazz answer first, if possible. We have many students in the audience today. What kernel of wisdom do you have for our youth? Some of you already gave us a little wisdom, but if you want to target it towards youth, what kernel of wisdom and what main message do you hope they take away from this conversation today? Mr. Shabazz, if you would start.
Yeah, I would love to. Again, I want to start by saying it is an honor to be asked to share with you all, and I definitely look at this as a learning experience as much as a sharing or offering experience. But if there was one thing or a couple of things I could offer in terms of students, whether that's college, high school, or even younger, the group that we saw, it's, well, let me stick with college students. Please, please, please participate. Please take the messages from the earlier panel about your expertise and looking at the challenges before us in a larger context. You don't have to go to Mississippi to find communities that have disparate outcomes, whether it's economics, whether it's social, or any other kind of inequalities. And when you see those, one way of contributing, and I think the best way of contributing, is just recognizing, back to that first question, that we are all human beings. Find that human value and look at yourself as truly in those shoes. So I'll share a more practical example because I don't think I quite got it there. But in Mississippi, as in many other states, a lot of the focus has become, or if you listen to the news or different reports and articles, on workforce training with regards to renewables, with regards to energy efficiency. We ran into some problems about really doing quality training in minority and underprivileged, underserved communities, which are typically not academically credentialed. Those communities don't have the same academic standings. One of the things that Mississippi is always 50th or first in, depending on how you look at it, is our educational outcomes. As students, if you can offer a summer, if you can offer a weekend to come down and get to know community members, not just your fellow students in Mississippi, or connect online. Use the technology. Use whatever expertise or kind of comparative advantage that you may have to really share in some of the concepts that we're talking about. So to quickly tie those 2 points together, a solar certification, although we are working hard to get them, and we're following the leadership of Reverend Woodberry and some of the great things that he has done in terms of making that more accessible. A solar certification, a solar credential, is not required to put solar panels on rooftops. It is good, it is great, and we promote it, we want it. We want to do the best quality job possible when we are called upon to do those jobs. But it is not required. And where those credentials are required in states other than Mississippi, it's only one person that has to be credentialed. So as students, as young folks, you may, I'm sure you all know, that on many jobs, as a supervisor role, you may have some credentials, but the actual physical work, if we're talking about some physical labor involved, they may not be credentialed, but they can do the job better than anyone there. You're credentialing and then lending that to creative structures, such as cooperatives, such as community land trusts. Really think about what would it mean to you all as students to be that credentialed person that could enable a company to show, or a group of people, a cooperative group of people, to show what they can do just based on your credentials, whether or not you're there. These same systems happen. I heard conversations about Dominion and some of the things that are going on in the different places and people who spoke before, Union Hill and things like that. There may be one person, there may be two people, but there are crews doing things that don't necessarily have the credentials. There's things happening in Virginia that are governed by people that might be in California or that may be heavily invested outside of the area. And I encourage us to be creative and to look at creative structures such as cooperatives, such as community land trusts, and really lend your expertise from that perspective. And I think we can truly not only make a change in Mississippi, but throughout the just transition movement throughout the United States and globally.
Thank you. Anyone else want to answer that question?
I want to say, first of all, that you are never too young to be involved. So I often share with young people that my first act as an activist, as an organizer, I was 14 years old. And that every movement their work is accelerated and intensified when young people are involved. So when we look at the Green New Deal with Congresswoman Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez and others, many of the people who are behind her are the young people of the Sunrise Movement. So get involved. You're never too young to get involved. The other thing is each one teach one. So in 2017, we had in Florence, South Carolina, a solar installer, train the trainer workshop. And we could have gotten the funding and just conducted that among ourselves, but what we did was we brought in Angela Harris, Singh Shabazz, and other people from 2 other states, along with South Carolina, and trained them on how to install solar and say, go back to your community and teach other people. So last year in 2018, we trained 12 people who were recipients, welfare recipients from the Department of Social Services on how to install solar. And halfway during the class, a gentleman came in from a solar company, looked at the curriculum, spoke with the instructor, spoke to the students, and offered everyone who completed the class a job. At Coastal Carolina University, Dr. Pam Martin and her students have a solar installation program where they have been trained in partnering with a group called Revolve out of California. And just last year, they put solar panels on a VFW post in Conway, South Carolina. And a lot of the students who have participated in the programs upon graduation have gone on to get jobs in the solar industry. Because the solar industry is not just about putting solar panels up. There's marketing jobs, sales jobs, administrative jobs that are also available. And then you can work with some of the utilities or co-ops. It's hard. But last year in August, we cut the ribbon on the Whitney M. Slater Solar Farm, community solar farm, in partnership with Duke, named after Loretta Slater's daughter who died of cancer because they lived between two polluting facilities. And she's very committed to making sure that, if possible, at some point in time, no other child dies because they have breathed in polluted air. And we were able to cut the ribbon on a solar farm that served 1,200 households. But even more than that, the one-time fee of $250 to connect, we got that waived for a third of the low-income households in the community. And more than that, we have to be careful when we work at this thing that we do not replicate models of injustice, because to willy-nilly connect homes to solar farms that are energy inefficient, where people are heating and cooling the outdoors, only means that their electricity will still be disconnected, that their electric bills will still be beyond their means to pay. And so we have 1,500 homes that receive free energy efficiency upgrades. And so you can even start small. Let's go to Union Hill, let's go to Buckingham, and let's take people off the grid. Let's disconnect all of the outdoor lighting on the front and side porches and put up solar lighting that you can buy from Walmart that have motion detectors. Let's challenge Dominion Energy by saying, guess what? None of us are going to wash our clothes or use our electricity during peak hours when the rates are the highest, and let them lose money if they fail to listen to the people's demand. Don't believe that you're too young or that you don't have the skills, because the future belongs to you. And just as in times past, we are only where we are today because of the energy and the courage of young people like you. I always say this to people. There was a time in Virginia, South Carolina, Mississippi, and other places where we could not sit in this room, white, black, and others, and criticize the powers that be without being dragged out of here and dragged off to jail. But because a lot of young people, college students like the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and others, stood up, we live in a better world. So your time is now, and the future is yours, and it's never too late to start.
Anyone else want to
I guess
leave a kernel of wisdom?
Yeah, the most important thing is for you to realize or understand that you have power. How many folks in the room actually believe you have power?
Yes?
You see, if we can make that grow and help people to understand that, because so many folks give their power away. But there are, as Reverend Woodberry said and others, there are so many examples of how folks are actually reclaiming their power. Everybody got a cell phone in the room? Grab your cell phone. So when you get a second, look at the pictures of the folks who were at the lunch counters during the Civil Rights Movement. See who are those folks who are sitting there. For those of you who said you're here because you want to learn about environmental justice, look at the pictures in Warren County, North Carolina, when the flashpoint for the environmental justice movement. Look at the bodies that were laying in the roads trying to stop the cancer-causing, the PCBs that the trucks were carrying coming into that community. Look and see who were those folks who were laying across those roads. Those were young people people who are younger than the folks who are in this room in some instances. Look at the environmental movement of the late 60s and early 70s. Those were folks who were your age, who were standing up and saying that they wanted something better. Look at the Black Lives Matter movement. See who you see marching in the streets, trying to stop the murder of young men of color and others. Look at Standing Rock, when they were putting the dogs and the hoses in sub-zero temperature weather. Look at the faces of many of those who were standing there. Those were young people. Look at Flint, Michigan. Little Miss Flint and the rest of the crew who have been standing up against injustice. Those are babies there, and others. You see, folks are realizing that they literally have power. Reverend Woodberry talked about the Sunrise Movement, or talked about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. It's the Sunrise Movement who's pushing a new Green Deal. Alexandria, who I love, is a politician. It is those young people across the globe who are making change happen. It is 0 Hour. And the young brothers and sisters who are a part of that organization is the HBCU Climate Change Initiative that Dr. Robert Bullard and Dr. Beverly Wright started, but it is young brothers and sisters on those HBCU campuses who are saying that we want something better and we're willing to invest our time. Folks who look just like you, who are in your age group, in some instances who come from some of the communities that you come from. But you have to realize that you have power. And in that power, there is accountability. There's accountability for ourselves, but there are also accountability for those who are supposed to be using our tax dollars and doing the right things. But you have to realize that you have power. Everybody say power. Power. It almost got good to you. Try it again. Say power. Power. Everybody do me a favor. Stand up, because sometimes when you're sitting down, you just don't know what time it really is.
Want us to stand?
Everybody stand up. Everybody put your right hand in the air like it's 1968 at the Olympics. Everybody say power. Power. Now take that and do something with it, because we can actually make real change happen. But it's up to us. Nobody's going to come and save us. Yeah. We have to save ourselves. In the environmental justice movement, we say that communities speak for themselves. That's right. So make sure that your voice is heard, but make sure there's action behind your voices also. Yeah. That's power.
So we're going to pose some questions from the audience, and Dr. Finley-Brook is going to ask you a few questions.
So we had so many fantastic questions. I want to dig a little deeper on some of the things that we were only able to scratch the surface with, so that's why I've chosen these 4, although I can say all of them are fantastic. And what people were getting at with these questions is the role of different agencies. So what do NGOs have to do? What do other institutions have to do? What does the state have to do? What is the role of the business sector? We've talked about some of these corporations. So I'm going to read the exact questions, but I think it's interesting that that's part of what people would like to know. So this one refers to non-governmental organizations. And so what advice would you give to predominantly white nonprofits that need to convince their board of directors to engage in environmental justice work? So maybe we need to make some changes within those structures themselves. But the question is, what is the role of NGOs? And what is the role of white supremacy, even within our green movement? So I think that's a fantastic question. I know many of us, Queen Shabazz, our coordinator of the Environmental Justice Collaborative, that's something that we talk about a lot. So that's one question. Another question was about corporations. And the question was, what are some of the factors that these big companies are ignoring when they try to push forward projects like are happening in Buckingham and Union Hill? So what do corporations perhaps need to change in the way that they're working? This was a specific question to Mustafa Ali, but I think it's getting at a really interesting tension here. And it says, what are the biggest commonalities and differences between the EPA and the Hop Caucus's approaches to environmental challenges? So we could start thinking about the state EPA means a lot of things. We don't want it to think of it as a monolithic agency, but we do have to think of what that means at the federal level. So how does that compare and contrast with a fantastic large federal organization as well, like the Hop Caucus? And then I want to bring in just a little bit more complexity as you guys are thinking about that, but I know the ability of my guests, or I would not do this. And the question is, and I love this one, how do you balance the pace needed for trust and collaboration? So we're talking about community renewables, and we all know that that's not something you snap a finger and it happens. So how do you balance that need for trust, that need for collaboration, with the urgency to respond to climate change and environmental destruction? So if we could center that final question, but then think about corporations, think about universities, think about the government, think about civil society. We would love to hear some of your kernels of wisdom. I will say we probably only have time for this one major question, and hopefully we'll hear from each person. So if you could be a little bit short in your answer so that we have time for everybody.
Which was the one major question? Because you said 4, the last one?
Yeah.
How do you build trust and collaboration and work at a community level, which we all know is essential, especially if we're talking about community-based renewables, climate justice, environmental justice? How do you balance that need to go slow and have trust with the urgency of climate change and environmental destruction? Working through all those complex institutions that we know exist.
Well, first, communities know the solutions. They may not have the resources, they may not be able to express it in scientific or collegiate terms, but they know the solutions that are needed for their problems. And so one of the things that we have to be careful about is from the Hermes principles, the environmental justice principles, that communities lead themselves and communities speak for themselves. Mm-hmm. And when you have outside entities coming in, NGOs, etc., their job is to simply provide the support and the resources that those communities say they need, not to come in with solutions, not to come in with resources and assume that this is what is needed. And so when you take that approach, and then on the community side, you have to stand up. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that happened with us, with the Big Green, is that we were very clear when we told them that if you do not come in, if you come into our community and you do not partner with an environmental justice organization that is leading the work, and you do not give us resources and assets to do the work, because slavery has been abolished, but some people don't realize that. If you do that, then we will support you. If you don't do that, then every mayor, every city council, every community meeting that you go to will be standing outside with signs, talking to the television media, telling you that we don't want you here. And so the communities have to stand up, but then the Big Greens, the NGOs, the outside entities also have to realize that you can't come into communities and just take over. Closing by saying this: if I went into a white community with a team of people of color and said that I was going to tell them what to do with their community, how to raise your children, how to deal with your family, I better leave the engine running on my car.
This is very, very much what I experienced also, in that we spoke about possibility of Union Hill or that area in Buckingham to have more and more solar possibility, and which may happen. But in one meeting, we asked the community members, after those of us who are more, knowing about all that, talked about it and how exciting that would be. And then we said, what do you think? Of course, we should have asked them first. Said, we need to find out more about it. Was the answer. In other words, they need to want to find out more about it, get into it, learn about it, So because if we work, no matter how good that is going to be, if we force it on the community, what are we doing? We're doing the things that we're saying we should not do. That would be environmental injustice in a way. So I just want to introduce something. The idea is that solar panels and renewable energy is not the only way at all to counter this climate change issue. There are so many, and I just want to introduce one, which we just had a workshop at Yoga Bill. And some of you know it's Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund. It's called CELDEF. And I say to young people, I believe you have the wisdom inside you. You just need to, keep yourself healthy and your mind clean and pure, balanced, and you will know what needs to be done. And with ideas like giving legal rights to rivers, mountains, and municipalities, community rights. And this is actually happening. 200 municipalities in U.S., the entire city of Pittsburgh was the first. So we take our own power that Mustafa was talking about, so that there cannot be state or federal preemption, because we have gone through all this regulatory thing, cycle after nothing that we do or have done have actually helped to stop. We delayed it, and we certainly will do more. But sometimes we have to think outside the box, and we need the young people to do, and you can do that. Thank you.
May I finish that? So I'm going to take a shot at the big one and just say that, okay, so we know there's an urgency around climate change, and if we don't know, we should know there is a very, very important component in doing any kind of work, and that is community trust. We go back years and years and years of injustices by this land, and also some great advancements. By no means do I want to be taken as any way anti-American or anti-progress, but there are historical breaches of trust, whether you talk about indigenous and Native American people, or whether you talk about communities of colors and many others. So those are very essential components. And I say that one way that we do that is not being afraid to stumble forward. It's one thing to fall backwards, but it's quite a different thing to stumble forward. So if I go back to that opening question about faith and about believing in something bigger, believing in some commonalities among all people, that yes, we take on the challenge and we recognize the urgency, but stumble forward. And one practical piece, again, that I would offer in terms of stumbling forward is it's not separating environmentalism, not only from people, but from economics. Your word, environomics. That would be a nugget that you could take away. And if we start, whether it's $1, whether it's literally a penny, another big concept is collective governance. If we can show that, just the will to work together and make decisions together around one penny, that penny in communities changes to dollars, thousands of dollars, and what you see, whether it's Duke Energy or Dominion or Southern Power that we are forced to deal with in the Deep South, those multipliers will come into play. But if we can practice collective governance, meeting people on an eye-to-eye level and making decisions not just about environmentalism or about environmentalism and about those innovative ways like bodies of water having rights and other things like that, but also about economics, then I think we meet the urgency, we stumble forward, and we ultimately get there.
Yeah, and let's not complicate stuff. I got a whole bunch of degrees. I work with some of the smartest scientists in the world. And the question that I hear everywhere I travel is, how do we build relationships with communities? I'm always amazed when somebody asks that question in 2019, because I'm thinking, have you ever been in a relationship? I mean, really, real talk. Just think about it. It's one about trust.
Right.
It's about respect. It's about communication.
Right.
And then if you want to get esoteric, it's about love. But just think about the first three, trust. So if you are not willing to invest, sisters who are in here, think about it. Every time a guy has come to you and said how much he cares about you and how he's interested in you, and if he hasn't willing to be able to invest in you in the sense of building trust, which means that you are showing up, it means that you are honest in your conversations, you can't have trust. So communities have had broken trust, has been shared. You know, the other part is communication. So you know if somebody is just spitting game or if they really are engaged in active communication with you. So people speak at communities, but they never listen. They don't hear the expertise. They don't hear the innovation that's going on. They have their agenda. They want to get to that as quickly as possible. And then the love aspect, all those other things have to be in place or you never can get to love.
Right.
So those are just those basic elements, but we want to put millions of dollars into trying to figure out how to build relationships and do all these other types of things when we could have just given that money to folks to make real change inside their community. So I just saved, and I probably just put a couple professors out of, a job. But that's the simplicity of this, and we completely try and complicate these things. People I often talk about, people want to talk about parts per million and parts per billion. If you want to get down like that, I can do that. But that's not the conversation that Mrs. Ramirez and Mr. Johnson want to have. They want to understand, is this going to cause cancer? Is this going to contribute to my liver and kidney disease? So forth and so on. Have a real conversation. So if we want to win on climate change, then we have to address these basic foundational concepts that sometimes we want to jump over top of. And then the other part is that if we want to win on climate change, everybody wants to talk about climate change, then we have to address those communities that folks ignored for decades. I was a part of some of this now, where for 40 years and even longer than that, folks were saying, I've got coal-fired power plants in my community and folks are getting sick. And it was communities of color and low-income white communities, and no one wanted to pay attention. And now those same fossil fuel facilities are warming up the planet. So now we're all in it together. Real talk? Those same pipelines that are running from Canada all the way down to folks at Standing Rock and everybody else were, focusing on, all the way down to the Bayou Bridge in Port Arthur, Texas, in the Manchester community in Houston, Texas. Those are the same ones that no one wanted to pay attention to, even though we had 2.4 million miles of pipeline in our country and we didn't need any more. So we've got to have some real talk about where this cancer is coming from and make sure that we're actually willing to extract it and make sure that it doesn't come back again. And that's the beauty of what Reverend Woodberry and others are doing around pushing to make sure that renewables are a true part of this new paradigm. So I'll stop there.
So we want to thank our panelists again for and just to kind of wrap it up, as you were all sharing your kernels of truth and wisdom, and also as you were sharing your the way that you see faith and ethics working with the work that you do on climate change and climate justice. The thought came to my mind as a minister, of course, the idea of the garden story from the Christian tradition, and that one of the first mandate in the Christian tradition is in a garden, and that mandate is what? Care for the garden. And so thinking of that was never actually, if you read the entire story narrative of Scripture, that's a mandate that's never rescinded. It was never usurped or never changed. And so whatever vocation, whatever work, whatever calling you might have, and whatever you're studying here, that mandate still stands, that care for the garden. So if you're a chemist, care for the garden. Don't go into a lab and create madness, right? So things that will destroy the earth and destroy our systems. But go in and create and develop and do the work that enhances and brings quality of life to not just humans or an industry, but to the entire earth and planet. And then you will be doing this good work. Thank you all.
Thank you.